Today I want to look at a somewhat lesser known, although it's not one of the really obscure sagas, and this is Gunnlaug Saga Ormstungu, the Saga of Gunnlaug Wormtongue, because it's a great small saga that really hits a lot of the high points of the sagas and gives you a lot of the kind of big ideas that come up in a lot of the more famous sagas. So to begin with, we hear about a man named Thorsten Egilsson. He is the son of the Egil Skallagrimsson, who is the protagonist of Egil Saga Skallagrimssonar. And he has a Norwegian visitor named Bergfinnr, who is very interested in dreams. One day, Thorstein and Bergfinnr are out working together, and Thorstein takes a nap and has what is obviously a unsatisfying dream. So Bergfinnr asks him to tell him it so he can interpret it. Thorsten says, well, I'll tell you if you think you can interpret it right. And he tells him of a dream wherein he owned a beautiful swan that sat on top of his house, and that a black-eyed eagle came from the mountains down to talk to the swan, and they spoke happily for a little while. But then another eagle showed up and fought the first eagle, and the two eagles killed one another. The swan was then dejected, but finally a falcon came and talked to the swan for a little while, and then they flew off together. And so Bergfinnr interprets this as Thorstein's wife, Jofridr, is pregnant with a daughter, and she will be very beautiful as the swan, and men will love her more than is reasonable, and they will kill each other over her. Thorstein doesn't like this. He says it's an unfriendly interpretation. But of course the sagas are full of dreams that have obvious hints about the future that the person involved never thinks is actually a real hint about the future. All right. Well, before long, Thorstein has to go to a thing, right, a council, a legal assembly, and his wife is pregnant and just about to give birth, and so he asks her, Jofridr, if she has a daughter, to leave the baby out to die. This was allowed under the laws of the Icelandic proto-republic into the first few years of the conversion to Christianity even. It was one of the details of law that the pre-Christian population insisted upon after they were baptized, that they would keep this old ability to expose children. Well, she does give birth to a girl, but she cannot stand the idea of exposing her to the elements and leaving her to die. So she gives her to a shepherd to take to Thorstein's sister Thorgerðr. So of course Jofridr tells her husband Thorstein when he comes home that she's left the child out to die, and Thorstein assumes this is true for 6 years. But then at a party at his sister Thorgerðr's place 6 years later, his sister asks him, when they're looking at 3 young girls growing up at the house, what he thinks of these girls. And Thorstein says, well, they're all very beautiful, but the most beautiful is that one. And he points out one of the girls, and she says, well, that is your daughter Helga. So now Thorstein realizes he's been tricked. His daughter is alive, but the girl is so beautiful that he takes back his wish to kill her, and they bring her back home and raise her there. So the saga turns then to a black-eyed young man growing up in the mountains who was 12 years old. This is Gunnlaugur. He is nicknamed Ormstungu, Wormtongue, because his poems already at the age of 12 are very insulting. He has, fierce burns or whatever in his poems. And he wants to go abroad and makes a lot of trouble for his dad, kind of plays a lot of pranks on him, a lot of tricks, trying to get him to allow him to leave Iceland on an adventure. But his dad, Illugi, won't let him, and so he runs away to live with Thorstein for a year. And Thorstein is a famous lawyer, so Gunnlaugur takes advantage of that and learns the law from him. And toward the end of his year with him, he says, you know, Thorstein, you've taught me a lot of law, but you've never taught me the formula for legally engaging a man to a woman. Thorstein says, well, I can teach you that. And he says, oh, well, let's practice, right? Let's have a girl here, and I'll act like I'm getting engaged to her. How about your daughter Helga? Thorsten's suspicious of this, and he says, you must promise there's no underlying meaning to this, because he knows the two of them are sort of into each other. I pray that they're the same age. I just realized that the way that this is set up, it kind of makes it sound like Helga is a lot younger, but I think by this point Helga is about the same age as Gunnlaugr, that we've skipped from her being 6 to him being 12, and now they're both like 12 or 13. I pray. Anyway, I don't remember the exact ages it says at this point. Well, Thorstein teaches him the formula for legally engaging himself to a woman, so of course Gunnlaugr says it with Helga. We're not told what the formula is. I know a lot of people today would love to know it. Knowing in his heart that he's kind of promising that they're going to get married. Well, 6 years later, Gunnlaugr is his better relations with his dad, Illugi, now, and he asks him now, hey, can I go abroad? And Illugi says, yes, you're a lot more mature. I'll see to it. I'll get this set up, get you set up with a ship and stuff to go abroad. And before he's about to make his big trip, he's riding along with Thorstein one day, Gunnlaugr is. And Thorstein says, you know, I'd like to give you a present. Why don't you choose one of my horses, any one of them? A generous gift. Gunnlaugr says, you know, nah, why don't you offer me something that I actually do want? And Thorstein says, well, what is that? And Gunnlaugr says, your daughter Helga. Thorstein says, that's foolish. I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk crazy talk. Well, Gunnlaugr says, no, come on, think about it. Who's a better, manlier match for her than me? And Thorstein says, well, I can think of about 7 men in the area who are. And he says, no, none of those men is as cool as my dad Illugi is. And of course, Thorstein says, well, if your dad Illugi were the one who was going to marry my daughter, that would matter, right? But you haven't proven yourself. Well, Gunnlaugr is very insistent about it. He pesters his dad about it, who's also confused. You know, didn't Gunnlaugr want to go abroad? Why is he working on marrying a girl now? But they managed to make a deal with Illugi brokering it that Thorstein is going to put Helga on basically daughter layaway for 3 years, while Gunnlaugr goes abroad to prove himself as a Viking and a Dranger. This is quite common in the sagas. I call it the 3-year daughter layaway, where our young hero is in love with a woman, hasn't proven himself enough yet to be worthy of marriage, but makes a deal with the dad. Hey, if I come back in 3 years and I've proven myself abroad, you promise that you're not going to marry her to somebody else in the meantime. So a 3-year daughter layaway is assured for young Gunnlaugr. And at the age of 18, he goes abroad, and first, as a aspiring young Icelander, he goes to the court of the ruler of Norway, who at the time is Jarl Eirikr, son of the famous Jarl Håkon. Well, he comes into the court of the Jarl with a nasty boil or sore or something of that nature on his feet. And the king asks him, well, with that nasty thing on your foot, why are you not limping? And Gunnlaugr says, well, a man ought not to limp while his legs are still both the same length. This must have been a great comeback when the saga was written in the late 1200s. I don't understand why it's such a great comeback. The king thinks this is kind of a saucy answer. So he says, how old are you, kid? And he says, I'm 18. And the Jarl, but he's effectively king of Norway, ruler of Norway. The Jarl says, well, you're not going to live another 18 years. To which Gunnlaugr replies, don't you go cursing me. You better be praying that you don't wind up like your dad did. And of course, Håkon Jarl died in a pigsty. He was murdered by a slave there. Well, Eirikr casts him out, banishes him from Norway, because of course he's lucky to escape with his life after insulting a ruler like that. Now Gunnlaugr goes to England, where the king is Ethelred the Unready. He composes great poems for Ethelred. This is of course what a Norse skald is supposed to do, praise his ruler in exchange for cool stuff. Ethelred does give him cool stuff, clothes and weapons and such. And one day in England, another Norseman approaches Gunnlaugr and asks him for a loan of money. Gunnlaugr loans him the money and later tells King Ethelred that he's done this. And Ethelred says, oh, that was a bad idea. That man is a notorious thumper. You'll never get your money back. So Gunnlaugr goes to this man and demands his money back, but the man says, no, I'm not going to give it to you. So Gunnlaugr challenges him to a duel a few days later, 3 days later. He tells Ethelred, and Ethelred says, oh, he's not just a notorious thumper, he's a notorious wizard. And he has the ability to dull swords by looking at them. So what you need to do, Gunnlaugr, when you go into this fight, is show him your sword before the battle, and he'll look at that and he'll dull it with his magic. But keep this sword that I will give you, of course a sword from a king, what better gift could there be? Keep that hidden till the fight starts and then kill him with that. And this is exactly what Gunnlaugr does. proving his extra courage and worthiness beyond just your typical skald and warrior at a king's court. He travels around a little bit more after his time in England. He goes to Ireland, where he composes poems for a young, naive Irish king who turns to his advisor and says, well, what's a good reward for a poet? Should I give him 2 ships? And of course his advisor says, no, that's too much. He spends some time in Orkney, where the Jarl of Orkney, I believe it's Sigurd the Jarl at that time, also generously rewards him for his poetry. And after a while we find him in Sweden with a king Olaf, who already has an Icelandic skald. So Gunnlaugur finds himself in competition with this other Icelandic skald named Hrafn. Now, at one point, Hrafn and Gunnlaugur come to the court of King Olaf, and they both want to deliver a great poem they've composed for him. And they fight and argue about who should go first, and finally Hrafn says, let the king decide. So the king says, well, I'll let Gunnlaugur speak his poem first, because I know he'll just throw a temper tantrum otherwise. So Gunnlaugur speaks forth his poem in praise of Olaf. Olaf turns to Hrafn and says, what did you think about Gunnlaugur's poem? And Hrafn says, well, it was a good poem, Lord, but showy, clumsy, and trying too hard, like Gunnlaugur himself. So then Hrafn speaks forth his poem, and the king turns to Gunnlaugur and says, what did you think about his poem? Gunnlaugur says, well, it's a handsome poem, Lord, like Hrafn is, but there's not much under that handsome surface. And Hrafn, didn't you think that the king would be worthy of a dropa? A dropa being a particularly prestigious, long skaldic poem with a repeated sort of chorus or refrain part. Well, Hrafn is furious about this result, and he hurries back to Iceland. And it's been about 3 years since Gunnlaug's been out, so Gunnlaugur starts thinking about going back to Iceland too. But Hrafn beats him back to Iceland. Gunnlaugur stops in England before going back to Iceland and gets caught up in a war Ethelred is running at the time. Ethelred says, you can't leave me, I need you in my army. So Gunnlaugur is detained for another, I think a whole other year, before he manages to make it back to Iceland via Norway. And he shows up exactly in time to randomly wrestle somebody at the dock who tells him that Hrafn is now marrying his sweetheart, Helga. Gunnlaugur wants to go to the wedding, but of course his dad, Illugi, prevails upon him, telling him it's a bad idea. But nonetheless, Gunnlaugur does attend some social events with Hrafn and Helga present, which strikes me as a really bad idea. Naturally, he moons over Helga, who thought he was dead. Hrafn told her that he was, it turns out. And now Hrafn is in a bad position because his wife doesn't want to have any sort of intimacy with him and is in love with another man, who even delivers her a wonderful cloak that he's brought to her from Norway. And that's a big scandal always in the sagas when a man gives another man's wife any kind of gift. Finally, at one feast, this leads to Gunnlaugur trying to run over Hrafn with his horse as he leaves. He's so frustrated and flustered about not having Helga, which prompts Hrafn to speak forth a poem that basically amounts to, hey, there's a lot of fish in the sea. And Gunnlaugur to respond with essentially a response that means there's not. Helga's the one I want. And so Gunnlaugur challenges Hrafn to a holmganga, a formal duel. There's a lot of different types of holmganga. One thing they share in common is there's always a delineated space. So some area that you cannot retreat from. That can be as small as just somebody's cloak. Traditionally it was a small island, hence the holm and holmganga, small island or river island, going ganga. And they have their duel at the Althing, the legal assembly for the whole island. So here are their poems to each other before their first duel. Here is Gunnlaugur. Nu emek ut o oiri, alvangs buin ganga, haps unni guð greppi, gort með tóknum hjorfi. Hnakk skal Helgu lokka, haus vinne ek frá ból lausan, loks með ljósum mekki, ljufsvelgs I tvo kljúfa. Now I am quite ready to walk out on the island. May God grant the poet luck with a drawn sword. I will knock the head from the swallower of Helga's love. Finally, I'll cut him in two with my bright sword. Hrafn responds, and these are both Drotkvat stanzas. Actually, Gunnlaugur's implies that it's written, probably composed about the same time as the saga's written, because it requires a late form nu ek, now am I, instead of the classical nu em ek, in order to get the skult ending, the ending with the same consonant as oiri in that same line. Here's Hravan responding in Throat. Veit at grepper hvar greppa gagenselli hlutur fagna. Her bensigdum brugðit, búin egg í leggi. That mun ein och ekja ungmär þó at vit særumsk, þorna spong av thingi, þegens hugrekki fregna. The poet doesn't know which will celebrate more happily. Wound icicles, swords, are drawn ready for leg chopping. She'll be both single and a widow, the young woman, if we both kill each other, but she'll hear of her husband's daring boldness. And since it was Gunnlaugur who made the challenge, it is Hravan who can strike the first blow. So Hravan swings his sword at Gunnlaugur, but he swings so hard that when it hits Gunnlaugur's shield, it shatters, and a piece of the blade goes into Gunnlaugur's face. Now, one way you can lose a duel is by being disarmed, and another way is by having blood drawn. So Hravan is disarmed, Gunnlaugur's blood has been drawn, and they start arguing about who's won the duel. Their families separate them, and it is in the saga we're told that this is when Iceland outlawed dueling, or holmgangens. Well, Gunnlaugur continues to be just intolerable to Hravan, and for instance, he spies on Helga while she's out bathing, obviously nude, and composes love poems about her. So not only is he violating the woman's privacy, although she seems to kind of go along with it, but he's also composing love poems, which can get you killed. Full outlawry or death can be the penalty for that in medieval Iceland. So not long after the bathing incident, Hravan breaks into Gunnlaugur's house and says, let's go to Norway where our families can't break us apart and where there's no law against dueling. Gunnlaugur says that's an excellent suggestion and offers him hospitality that night, as he thinks the suggestion is so manly, so Drenger. But Hravan doesn't accept it, so the two men make their way to Norway, with Hravan getting there first. Hravan makes his way to a valley that would be close to Steinhér in Nord-Trøndelag today, and that's where he waits for Gunnlaugur to show up. Meanwhile, Gunnlaugur shows up in Trondheim, the capital of Norway, which is the sort of portal to and from Iceland. And there he sees some street performers acting like they are Gunnlaugur and Hravan, and one of them says, you know, this is sort of like the scene in Gladiator where Maximus sees the two guys playing on the street as Maximus and somebody else, and kind of making fun of them. One of the street performers is making fun of Gunnlaugur and says, I am an Icelander and therefore I'm slow to remember my oaths, or something like that. Gunnlaugur gets furious about it, regrets how much he's been dragging his feet apparently to go to Norway. I think he delays for like a year while he does some Viking raiding. Goes to the valley where Hravan is waiting for him. They agree to fight with an even number of men, so they both have men with them. And so the extras, I think, are from Gunnlaugur's side. I think they're the mountain guides. They're excused from the fighting to watch and report on what happens. Well, what happens is Hravan and Gunnlaugur quickly kill each other's men. All of this over Gunnlaugur and Hravan's private fight over one woman, Helga. And eventually Gunnlaugur chops off Hravan's leg. Gunnlaugur doesn't want to keep fighting. He says, well, Hravan, you're ovig, or you're incapable of fighting. It would not be Drenger for him to continue fighting against this guy. But Hravan says, no, I want to keep fighting. 'Tis a flesh wound, right? Just bring me some water from the creek. Gunnlaugur goes down, fills, I think, a helmet with water, brings it back to Hravan, leans in to give him the water, and just as he's leaning in, Hravan chops at Gunnlaugur's head with his sword, giving him a wound that he will die of a few days later, just as Hravan dies where he lies with his removed foot, or removed leg. And that night, the spirits of Hravan and of Gunnlaugur appear to their respective fathers to tell them that they've been killed by each other, with a poem, of course. They're both poets, skalds. Now, after the deaths of Hravan and Gunnlaugur, when they appear to their fathers, here are the poems that they speak. This is Gunnlaugur's poem for Illugi. To Illugi. Vissa ek Hravan en Hravni hos kom eg I legi, hjalt ugutum hogva hrinnfiski mik brynju. Þó hraskari hlýra hlautven ári benja, kláv Gunnspotti Gunnar Gunnlaugs hovið runna. Notice the three occurrences of Gun in the last couplet there. That's an extra skaldic achievement if you can get all of your alliteration on the same word or root, and Gunn is battle. I know that Hraven's sharp sword broke my armor, but my own hard-hilted sword came to him in the leg. Then the happy eagle drank the fresh swamp of wounds, its blood. That war goddess's war twig, sword, opened war bath's Gunnlaug's skull. His name, Gunnlaugur, means war bath. So, I'm just translating it that way because of the all the Gunns, right? Gunn sproti, that's the war twig, so the sword of a war goddess of Gunnar, Gunn being maybe not a war goddess, but a Valkyrie, so a Valkyrie's war twig, a sword still, opened Warbath's Gunnlaug's head. This is what Hraven says to Onundur. And notice we got the three Gunns in the last couplet of Gunnlaugur's poem, but in Hraven's poem, all but 2 lines, well, so there's 4 couplets, all but 1 couplet have the same word in all 3 alliterating positions, so he's even outdoing Gunnlaugur in death. Róðit sverð en sverða sverðróknir mikgerði, voru roind í rondum randgóken fyrir ver handan. Blóðug hygg ek í blóði, blóðgogl ofskor stóðu. Sorfikken hlaut sora, sorgamar enn og þramma. My sword was reddened with blood, but the other swordsman reddened his and mine. Our shields were tested hard. I think bloody blood geese, ravens, stand in my bloody brain, and the wound-loving wound vulture, raven, got to wade in the wound river. And we're told that Helga, while dejected over all of this, did eventually marry another man, a falcon, if you will, and that she died many years later clutching the cloak that Gunnlaugur had brought her at one of these feasts. So, this saga, like I said, has a lot of what makes the bigger sagas memorable in a smaller package. The fight between the 2 poets, very characteristic of the sagas. Something very similar is in the saga of Bjorn, the champion of the Heathardalar folk. And it's got great poetry. Of course, the skaldic poems are, most fun in Old Norse, right? I mean, it's the alliteration that makes them interesting, the rhyme and stuff, and the weird kennings. It's always hard to duplicate in an English translation. And also, oddly enough, this saga is one of the very few that's actually attributed to an author. Ari Thorgilsson, Ari Infrodi Thorgilsson, is said to be the author, which is extremely unlikely. Ari was one of the earliest Icelandic writers we know of, a historian and scholar in the early 1100s. This saga actually seems to have been pretty late, probably written in the latter 1200s, 1280s, probably something like that, about the same time as Njál's saga was written. Well, I hope the story has perhaps entertained you. I hope the video and its information about Norse sagas and literature might have informed you. And if so, I encourage you to check out one of my more than 250 other videos on this channel in topics covering all aspects of Norse language, myth, literature, and culture. I make these videos for free in beautiful places in my Rocky Mountain homeland of Colorado and Wyoming, but I'm supported by Patreon donations, and I encourage you to check out my Patreon page if you'd like to help me keep doing this. I've also translated sagas, including the Saga of the Volsungs and the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And I'm currently working on the Saga of Rolf Kraki and the Saga of Hervorn Haedrek, which will be my 3rd book after the Poetic Edda and the Saga of the Volsungs. I imagine that'll be out in late 2019, early 2020. Of course, those are mythical heroic sagas as opposed to sagas of Icelanders, but sagas nonetheless. For now, from beautiful Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.
I think there was just a big rock fall just behind that rise.